Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
It's not just you. Portland is getting hotter. In the past decade, the number of days it's over 90 degrees has nearly doubled to an average of 23 days per year. And that has huge implications for our health. But Portland State University professor Vivek says that's not all. He also warns that the very social fabric of what it is to be a Portlander in the summer is at stake. So today on CityCast Portland, Professor Shondas is walking us through the impacts of heat on Portlanders, the big ideas that could help, and the little things every one of us can do to make a hotter Portland more hospitable for everyone. It's Monday, August 19th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. I feel like I didn't hear a lot of people really start worrying about heat in Portland until like the 2021 heat dome, when we hit like 116 and people were like, whoa, that's Arizona temps. But you'd been sounding that alarm for years before that. Like, when did researchers like you begin to see heat as a major problem in our area?
Right. When I moved to Portland area in the mid-90s, heat was not on the mind. It wasn't even something I was thinking about a great deal. Water was a much bigger issue, and there are entire systems that manage our water. There's public agencies, state agencies, local drainage districts, etc. So I started digging around in this in about 2005, asking around and seeing whether the Oregon Health Authority, whether City of Portland, Multnomah County were working on things of heat, and it did not show up anywhere. So around 2012, I started a bit more serious work in it, starting to measure temperatures, doing this kind of work, setting it up in front of folks and saying, here's what I'm seeing is that some areas are actually a lot hotter than other areas in the city. And that really started to open some eyes, but still mostly crickets. And then in 2012 and 2014, another 2015, 16, we started seeing temperatures going up every year. And that's when we started getting a lot more attention on this and brought together folks from public and nonprofit organizations to actually have a conversation about what would it look like if a big heat event came through. And a lot of folks, participated, responded, but end of the day said, this is cute, great. Keep going. Researchers do great work. Thumbs up.
Let me stop you there for a sec. Aside from there just being, decades where Portland really wasn't thinking about heat, and as you stated, there wasn't much of an infrastructure, monitoring it like our water has been. Why has Portland been especially poorly equipped to handle rising temperatures?
Yeah, well, the history of Portland is one of temperate temperatures, right? People recognize it doesn't snow a lot. It doesn't get hot a lot. And so when we talk about a region that's built out around historic norms, we see really not much attention to a lot of the designs that could help with heat. And what we end up inheriting in many ways is a landscape that just is completely absent when it comes to any heat preparedness. We don't have an AC culture. We have plenty of energy from the rivers and hydropower and to a certain extent coal and other forms of energy. But we don't really have a great deal in terms of how we go about distributing air conditioning units like we see in the Southwest or the South, for example. So generally speaking, the culture combined with the infrastructure combined with kind of the technology is pretty woefully underprepared, in some ways maladapted to address increasing temperatures.
Yeah. And I think we all understand the health risks that, come with hot weather. I mean, Multnomah County saw something like 72 heat-related deaths during that 2021 heat dome we just discussed. And this year alone, there's been about nearly 20 statewide. And we've also heard a lot about the geographic disparities with how hot our region gets, more pavement, more heat. But Something that I found interesting is that you think we're also at risk of losing social connections because of this extreme weather. Like, what do you mean by that?
So part of the reason I know I love living in the Pacific Northwest in Portland is that in summer is our kind of heavenly time here. Like the weather is lovely. We can go outside. We spend a lot of time outside. People cherish that moment because in the winter it's a little bit trickier unless you're a real all-weather warrior to get out in the rain and the cold. But in the summer, we really, you see the restaurants outside. People are at parks. There's so much activity. And I think the fact that heat has kind of almost created, ironically, a chilling effect on spending time outside with friends is interesting to me because when it gets hot, we isolate, we go inside, and we don't see people at parks when it's hot. We don't see people outside a great deal. So it really does, in many ways, create an anxiety. I've noticed, and in terms of people and their expectations of what summer was for them for a period of time, and then what it might look like now and into the future of the amount of time we can spend outside with our friends and family and others. And that is to me a very real challenge of trying to manage what it means to be living in the Northwest right now.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, some bigger policy changes we should be implementing. This year's Calvin and Meiho Tanabe Address, which is the annual lecture the OHSU Foundation puts on that brings thought-provoking speakers to Portland, is featuring a non-human keynote speaker for the first time in its nearly 10-year history. And no, it's not a super smart signing monkey like I assumed and am probably still wishing for. They're actually hosting Sophia the robot, an AI-powered humanoid who has spoken at the UN and is the first machine to receive citizenship. I guess that's cooler than a monkey. Sophia has captured the imaginations of global audiences since her debut at South by Southwest 8 years ago. Her interactive talk takes place on Wednesday, November 13th at the Newmark Theater. It's all about the awe-inspiring potential of AI and robotics to advance healthcare and life sciences, and we should probably all go because it might be our only chance to get in good with one of our new robot overlords. So go grab your tickets today at ohsufoundation.org/Tanabe. That's TANABE.
This podcast brought to you by Ring. With Ring cameras, you can check on your pets to catch them in the act.
Izzy, drop that.
Or just keep them company.
Aw, I'll be home soon.
Make sure they're okay while you're away. With Ring. Learn more at ring.com/pets.
So when we talk about solutions, the first thing that tends to come up is of course, you plant more trees. And you did recently co-author a study that found Portland's overall tree cover decreased between 2014 and 2020. It feels like a no-brainer. Yeah, like planting more trees will help. But I guess there is also a concern about planting more trees just because of the other extreme weather flip of that coin, where a lot of people lost houses because these large trees were breaking and falling on them. Have you also looked into that,
Yeah.
Like, just like being like more trees and then just people being like, I don't want a big tree next to my house anymore. I'm afraid.
For sure. Those are very real concerns. We've seen it bear out in extreme winter storms and ice storms and events. I will say that trees are an enormous benefit to the hot weather. We see trees, for example, cool a neighborhood by upwards of 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The actual experience of someone living in a home that has a lot of trees around it reflects a lot of that. The indoor temperatures tend to be much cooler with trees around. We have plenty of evidence that trees help. We have plenty of evidence that the loss of trees amplify temperatures in neighborhoods as well. So those are clear data points that we have identified. That said, trees are one slice of a much larger kind of suite of tools that we need to be looking to. The question around what happens when you plant a bunch of trees, they get big and then they get unwieldy. Science background would suggest also that trees that are well taken care of have far less failure and are far less dangerous to communities. So it's kind of like this question to me about how do we create the right conditions for that tree to really thrive, and what are the right trees? You put a large magnolia, for example, and put a big ice storm in front of that magnolia, you'll see huge limb failures that occur as well. So there are many trees that have that challenge. There are many trees that don't. So really, there's a whole field of urban forestry that gets into that right tree, right place concept.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about big picture policy stuff. If you were Governor Kotek, what would you mandate we do to help us deal with rising temperatures?
There are many strategies I think that come to mind. Starting with long term, I'd really be thinking about building codes. Right now, we're seeing an enormous amount of building happening again all around the region. And the question that comes up is, are we designing those for what the temperatures are going to be in 2040, 2050? These are some buildings that will
Right.
likely be around for 100 years. And yet we have zero code, zero direction for developers, for any designers, architects about how to design for future climate conditions. That's a big one that I would probably put on every agency's priority list to start thinking about what do those building codes look like. One example of that could actually be a very short to medium term kind of solution is that we have nothing that says a room cannot exceed 130 degrees. 110 degrees, 95 degrees. We have no ceiling of the temperature. So a room could, yes, get up to 65 degrees, but to also could get up to 130 degrees, which is what we were finding in residences indoors, where when a heat wave comes through, we see temperatures reaching those thresholds, which are not for humans to live in. And so having codes like that find their way into the development would be a very helpful first step into this. And then broader questions about building materials, aspect, the wind, blocking wind. These are things, the color of the buildings, things we know really modify and temper the heat would be really important.
Well, does anywhere have codes like that today that you're mentioning? Like, are there places that we can look to and go, oh, well, Arizona's doing this or something like that?
Not in the context I'm talking about. I've been watching Cambridge, Massachusetts closely because they're starting to put a number of these kind of first voluntary. None of them necessarily have teeth or enforceable at this point, but many of them have codes for designing for, or beginning to get codes for designing for heat. None of them, as far as I know at this point, are law in terms of what developers must do, though they're starting. And I wouldn't be surprised if last week something passed somewhere in the country. There are many cities that have kind of ceiling limits for indoor temperatures, like in Arizona, for example, in the South. There are several that we could point to where developers are required and designers are required to make sure that indoor temperatures don't exceed, for example, 95 degrees Fahrenheit.
95, that's still so hot.
It's still so high. Yeah. 80 is the most common number that's used, but I've seen some as high as 95.
Yeah, but you're saying the technology is out there, so it's not just like somebody mandating a code. Like, there are ways to keep buildings from exceeding these temperatures, right?
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
What other big picture policy stuff would you hone in on?
Yeah, another big one that comes to mind is the energy grid. We are in the Northwest, as we were just talking about, not a place that has had a lot of air conditioning units or heat pumps, but yet we're seeing these going out at record and blistering pace right now. No pun
The
intended.
ACs and stuff like
The
that?
ACs, the mini split heat pumps, and all of these are very energy hungry appliances. Like they're not like your fridge or even your dryer to a certain extent. They're very, very powerful energy pulls. And the energy grid is not designed for that level of demand. The energy grid was built 50 years ago, largely hasn't really seen a lot of shoring up over the decades, has had some work done to it for sure, but is largely the similar energy grid to what we had decades ago. And so the question then comes up, okay, what if there's a lot more current running through these wires, through these substations, and are we able to manage it? And is there enough capacity in the system to be able to send out all of these electrons in the level that we need to cool the spaces from the heat? Because if you have a rolling blackout that happens or a brownout during a heat event, the number of people being sent to the hospital will really peak.
Oh,
and
for sure.
That's work that's being done by several folks around the country at this point.
Yeah. It can be kind of a bummer to think about this stuff, but
sure.
you're also convinced that there are actions we can make as individuals to help make our communities more heat resilient. Like, what's something our listeners can do today?
Yeah, one of the first things I've been pointing to is when it gets hot, it's kind of like your earthquake preparedness kit. Like knowing if you don't have power, if you don't have, a toilet, what do you do? And there's been a wonderful set of resources that emergency managers have put out around earthquake preparedness. A very similar thing is like your heat preparedness plan. Like when it gets hot, when you are seeing this happen in your household, with your community, your family, your kids, etc., part of the question is, how are you going to cope? How are you going to stay cool? And a lot of people what we've seen in research now, a lot of people just make it up as they go. There's not much of a plan in place. So I'm a big fan of kind of knowing what to do in these situations. It can help alleviate a lot of the anxiety when a heat wave does come through. It can really identify the steps you can take. And in fact, if you take those steps to prepare yourself, you have a lot more ability then to take care of others around you.
Is there like a resource for people to check out? Because if somebody were like, make a heat plan now, I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah, there are several resources. One is you can go to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. There's some federal resources you could begin with. There's a website that is called heat.gov. It's a new federal government website that has a ton of resources on there. A lot of times the public health agencies like Multnomah County Public Health, Washington County, increasingly Clackamas County Public Health, Clark County in Washington, have websites that are focused on heat specifically. And so there are materials that agencies provide that are extremely helpful. Many folks have actually created mutual aid groups as well around this. Like I've seen several nonprofits and other community-based organizations like get on board with a heat awareness campaign. So, it's going to be hot. There's kind of a blast of communication out to folks about how to be better prepared and take the precautionary steps for heat. Knowing where your house gets hot, knowing where it gets cool, where your residence is, your apartment gets hot. Are there places outside of your home that you can go to? This is all part of the kind of plan in place. And it doesn't have to be a formal document. It's basically just kind of knowing what you're going to do when it gets hot. Are there friends, family, or neighbors' houses that you could actually stay in for some time when it gets hot? These are all very kind of ad hoc sometimes, though if the more they become kind of regular practice, the better equipped we'll be to be resilient during these extreme events.
Well, thank you, Vivek, for taking the time to hang out with us and go through some of these questions with me. And maybe you could send me some of those links and we'll link them in our show notes.
Great. Thanks, Claudia.
Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.